I went into it not really knowing what to expect or kind of what direction that we were going on with this one, but like I loved the journey it took me on. Like by the time it ended, I was just like, that was an experience. That was a full movie that I just watched. So
Amazing. I love that.
I'm curious if you can tell me just a little bit about like how long you've been kind of working on this movie, The Dreadful, and what the process of bringing it to life looked like from your end.
It's been a long, long process. So it's one of those stories of, I've been working on this for years and years and years. So I made a very small movie that did festivals in 2018 called Imitation Girl. And as we were on festivals, this was the script I had in my back pocket. They always say, have your next project in your back pocket. I had it. And it was not my next project. In fact, it would be many years before we made it. But uh, it was a project that was always sort of with me. It was always sort of like in the shelf, but within reach. And one of my agents actually had the idea to send it to Sophie Turner, which I thought was a really interesting idea because I kept getting no's because of the period, right? So this is a thing where people are scared of, period pieces. Anything sort of historical is scary for financiers. But once Sophie agreed to sign on, I think it was sort of this great niche where it was her returning to this time period that people wanted to see her in. And once Kit came on board, it was just sort of like we just kept rolling forward and got to production.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm so glad it turned out all that way, but it sounds like it was a huge journey.
It was a long journey, as all movies are long journeys, but this was a especially long one for sure.
Sure, totally. And I've seen just kind of in past comments and articles about this is that one of the things that this is loosely inspired by is a Buddhist tale that was famously turned into Onibaba, which I love Onibaba.
Gorgeous film, gorgeous film.
I saw that for the first time in college and like I was a young wee lad. I was like, this, I've never seen anything like this before, and I've just
Same.
rewatched it
Yeah.
over and over since then.
Yeah.
But kind of, I'm wondering if you can just talk a little about like your relationship with that movie. Like, do you remember when you first saw it, and was there any kind of
Yeah.
hesitation on making like your own version of this story when there's already like this big iconic movie that all like cinephiles are obsessed with?
I know, of course, I like just totally set myself up for this like impossible task because I love the film too, and I think it's untouchable. I actually was very lucky. I got to see a print of it at the Film Forum.
Oh,
So the first time I saw it was actually in a theater, which was, of course, just gorgeous experience, and I was just head over heels in love, of course. But I think for me, what really stuck for me was the core image of these two women, an older woman and a younger woman surviving in this sort of desolate landscape. That was for me the seed, and that codependent relationship, and then sort of seeing how that codependency starts to fray at the edges and dissolve and fall apart. That I think what was the most exciting aspect for me, rather than something that's like a strict morality play, right? So like the folktale is very much a morality play, right? Like here's the good and the bad. So I think really as a jump off point, I just liked that idea of the two women, that more so than the ideas of this one's good, this one's bad.
But yeah, that's what I mean. That's just what's so interesting about adaptation, where two things can start from the same point, and then we have Onibaba, and now we have The Dreadful, and they're different movies. Like you can see how they're kind of like have things in common, but like totally
Mm-hmm.
different experiences. And I just love that. I'm always so
Yeah, because the
fascinated.
filmmaker is interested in different things, right? So Kaneda Shindo was interested in one thing, and I'm interested in something else. We're also creating in very different times, right? So the folktale is much older than both of us,
Mm,
and the sort of evergreen elements of it will always be there, but we are operating in very different cultural environments.
sure, totally, totally. And the characters that you kind of come up with and you write in this movie are so interesting. Like, I want to specifically ask about Anne because I mean, her whole journey just again couldn't place where it was going, but just like sat back and just enjoyed the ride the whole time. So when you were kind of working on the script for the first time and making this movie, what about kind of the character really spoke to you and what excited you the most to like explore with her?
Yeah, I mean, I think she's tough, and I spoke about this with Sophie early on, where it's like it seems like she's just receiving information and sort of like a a vessel for all of the other characters around her, really until the end of the film, that when she takes agency. But the challenge for me was like, can we make this character alive, right? So yes, she's quiet. Yes, she's receiving. She doesn't really push back too hard against the people around her until she does. But can we sort of show that curiosity inside of her, that sort of emerging independent spirit that we see her ultimately become? Can we sort of see that from the beginning of the film? And I think that's something Sophie just did really beautifully. And I think, what Sophie also brought to the table that I thought was very interesting was that Anne is a spiritual person. And so she actually does have this sort of very solid idea of right and wrong in a spiritual sense. And so to see that sort of getting broken down and affected over the course of the film, I thought was a really interesting choice that Sophie herself brought to the table. So I think Anne grew a lot from the first version of her to the version we see on screen.
Sure, totally. And that jumps right into what I want to ask you next too, because you said you've been working on this all the way back since like 2018. Obviously took a long time to get together and Sophie and Kit get involved. But when you're like first working on the draft, you're first figuring out these characters, do you have like specific actors in mind for who you want to like someday play them, or is it more just a process of creating them, bringing them to life, seeing where the story takes them, and then you kind of like figure it out from there?
Yeah, I never write for specific actors in mind. I think the character has to fully inhabit themselves. And then the actor kind of comes in and brings their own essence to that sort of skeleton, right? So the character's skeleton then gets kind of fleshed out once the actor is involved. The one exception is sometimes I'll write like supporting roles for actors that I love who will, will pop in and out of my work. You'll see some familiar faces come and go. So that's sometimes I'll have specific people, but for the main characters, no, it's always just sort of from the spine of the story and the spine of the character. And I try to leave enough looseness, right? Like I try to leave them somewhat open so that an actor can read the character and say, okay, I can bring my juice to this
Sure.
smoothie.
Totally, totally. And we've talked about Sophie. I also want to ask just about Kit Harington because I mean, obviously, most people,
Angel.
obviously, a lot of people are going into this knowing these two from Game of Thrones, and like, it's just so cool to see them like they had that relationship in that show, and here they're totally different characters. So, kind of seeing them, Sophie and Kit, kind of work together. What was that like for your experience? Like, did they kind of just come on board and like figure it out themselves, or was it like kind of hands-on in understanding these characters?
Yeah, they're both very hands-on and they really wanted to make sure that they understood the intention of the script for sure. I mean, the thing I'll say is I did watch Game of Thrones, and so I didn't know them before this film. I knew them as Jon and Sansa, like everybody else. But within minutes of talking to them in a room, they are just so sort of charismatic and they are so themselves and they are so just completely alive and unique humans, unique and thoughtful humans that Game of Thrones is left behind very, very quickly. And they want to come to the material fresh. They both were excited to return to the time period, but in a new and different context, right? Like they're older, they're different, they look different. I think that they are in a different place in their lives. And so all of that background, I think they bring to this project. And it's very, very different from seeing 14-year-old Sophie Turner as Sansa Stark in season one.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a credit to their performances and your directing, but like you watch Game of Thrones and they're very clearly siblings. Like they play that so well. And then you go into this another period piece and nope, they are not siblings. This
Well,
is
very
different.
funny. Their relationship is sort of like a sibling, so they were both very funny about that. They were really dreading the time that they have to kiss. So, but they kept it together. So.
Sure. Sure, totally. And I read another thing just in a director's statement that you made that you had a really like small shooting schedule for this movie, right? Like only 18 days and a limited budget. And I'm sure that kind of putting this all together in such a short time and with not a lot of money, that there were a lot of challenges that kind of came with that. So
Yeah.
what was that kind of like filming the actual movie? And was there anything like you learned about like filmmaking that you're gonna kind of take with you after making The Dreadful?
Yeah, I mean, the enemies stay the same, the enemies of time and money, right? There's never enough of either. We had the added element of weather. So this film was done entirely on location in Cornwall, England. We built that hut as you would build a medieval hut. It did have one removable wall, but it was just we were completely exposed to the English winter the whole way through. And so I think for me it was just a reminder, if anything, that the crew is usually there, they're hardy, they're ready to go, but these actors did not hesitate for a second. Even like Marcia Gay Harden, who is like such a glamorous woman, was just so down to get down and dirty in the mud and the cold and sort of dealing with all of these elements, and having actors who are just completely committed to getting it done is absolutely essential, especially on a little indie like this.
Sure, totally. No, that makes total sense. Again, so glad it all turned out the way it did, because I'm sure there's probably 100 ways it could have gone wrong, but
Yes, indeed.
totally. So The Dreadful is now being released next week, and I've already told a bunch of like my film friends, like, you gotta keep an eye out for this one. You're gonna want to watch it. Is there like an aspect of the movie though, like whether it be a certain scene or a broader aspect you're kind of exploring here that you're most excited for audiences to see when watching it for the first time? Like, what are you ultimately hoping people get from The Dreadful?
Yeah, I mean, I think it lives in this sort of unique niche for horror and fantasy that is this sort of folk horror fantasy adjacent, like in between genres. And so I think that's sort of a fun sandbox to be playing in. And I hope people, yeah, just have an unexpected journey with this one.
Sure, totally. And I just have one more question for you because I'm almost out of time, but I always like to end with this when I can. It's Natasha, you're obviously a prolific working artist in Hollywood making great art. And so I want to ask, is there any other media out there that you've like either seen or witnessed recently, whether it be a movie, a show, a book, a play, or anything that you're like crazy about and want to spread the good word about?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm recently a new mom, so I have not been consuming anything, truthfully. I hear that I need to catch up on Heated Rivalry, so I'm hoping to get on that train soon.
Sure. You'll have a lot of fun. It's great.
Yeah. Awesome.